Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Health for Women podcast. Today, I have the honor and pleasure to have a mentor and good friend, as well as colleague Sam Miller. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, welcome. So today, jumping right in, we are going to discuss kind of right off the get, complete opposite sides of the spectrum. We're going to discuss relative energy deficiency syndrome, and we are going to discuss GLP-1s. So kind of getting in something that I want to start off with, like when we discuss those two sides, like what are we discussing? Like when we're looking at relative energy deficiency syndrome, GLP-1s, what are we discussing and what kind of person are we dealing with both?
Yeah. So in our industry, typically where we tend to see relative energy deficiency is someone who's been chronic dieting for a period of time or an athlete that's underfed, especially a great example of this, very common in like youth gymnastics. There are many younger girls, or these could be soccer players. Like you see it a lot in sports, but you also will see it in the chronic dieter who's basically been pursuing a deficit for a very long period of time. So trying to lose body fat and recomp, but in that process of training relatively intensely. Now, could the training be more intense or more progressive overload? For sure. Mm-hmm. But often what we see is they're underfueled, and the lower calorie state is creating a state of hormonal dysfunction and menstrual cycle irregularities. And what we may see over time is not only a lack of ovulation and a healthy menstrual cycle, but a decline in multiple systems. So we see falling progesterone, estradiol, testosterone, even thyroid that's coming down. And part of this is driven by metabolic adaptation. So metabolic adaptation is basically our body's response to chronic dieting and underfueling. And so in that process, we're seeing elevations in the HPA axis and cortisol, which is commonly known as a stress hormone. But cortisol plays an important role in energy regulation, especially in a state when we're not fueled. So a common misconception is people think, well, if I'm not eating, I don't need to like regulate my blood sugar, but there's definitely a role that cortisol and glucagon will play, especially when we're not in a fed state. Whereas in a fed state, insulin is kind of that player there that's going to come in and help to regulate that energy and that glucose that's coming in. So with relative energy deficiency, where we see this showing up in terms of women's health is usually low energy and mood, oftentimes fertility issues down the road if we don't restore those healthy progesterone levels, and oftentimes a difficulty in achieving the physique that these women would like to achieve, largely as a byproduct of so many attempts at that deficit in the past. So on one hand, relative energy deficiency, as the name implies, is there would be a lower calorie or lower energy state that could be, usually it's not acutely, but if it was very intense and acute, meaning like the depth of deficit was severe. So someone who's almost on like a starvation diet or very, very low calories, that could happen. That's really one end of the spectrum. Now, on the other hand, we have GLP-1s, which is a popular prescription drug, mainly marketed and advertised for weight loss. And GLP-1s tend to help most in terms of hunger regulation and satiety. And through that mechanism of regulating hunger and satiety, so GLP-1 is produced naturally in the body, but when we're taking this peptide, we can really shut down those intense hunger and cravings that people often experience if they are overweight or obese. So GLP-1 comes in and basically overrides some of that, because typically if we are overweight or obese, that fat tissue and the levels of inflammation in the body can impact things like our hunger, our cravings, but also our blood sugar regulation. All of those things can impact our meal by meal decisions. Mm-hmm. And that can lead to difficulties in losing weight. So even folks who really do truly want to follow a diet or exercise, they struggle with hunger management and often will overeat. Part of that is because our physiology almost begins to work against us at a point, because we've sort of tipped the scales in that direction. Just like how with metabolic adaptation, the unfavorable hormonal changes make it not so great for losing additional weight. Your body's almost conserving energy in that state. So with GLP-1s, these prescription drugs, obviously very popular, but also something that is very expensive, especially when not covered by insurance. Mm-hmm. Even under insurance medicine, insurance and Western medicine will be covered for a period of time, But then what we see is typically people will be paying out of pocket, and it can be a very costly drug to maintain, along with the fact that GLP-1s can have some side effects, especially when taken in higher doses. So if we look at these different sides of the industry, we basically have kind of a chronic dieter or someone who's under fueling on one hand. And overexercise can play into this too if we have a poorly designed training program. And on the other side, typically it's someone who has either accumulated a fair amount of weight, or sometimes it's the individual who's struggling to lose those last few pounds. And as a last resort, they're opting for this very powerful peptide and bringing that compound into play, thinking, okay, this is going to be my ticket to my goal physique or to my goal body composition. So I'd say that's where those two players are kind of in the industry and how they fit overall.
Yeah. So shifting back to like relative energy deficiency syndrome and unpacking the typical athlete that we're going to see with it. Like, what can that, like, let's just go with the first athlete of like the one who's maybe overtraining, like, right? Like overtraining and not supporting it with nutrition. What are like, you talked a lot, covered a lot of topics very quickly. Like, and I know this from years of working with you, years of working with clients, is like typically the first thing that we're going to see is progesterone is going to tank. Like that's going to be the first thing that goes. And we see these athletes oftentimes either have bad menstrual cycles or they lose them completely. What does that, when looking at that athlete who's overtraining and underfueling, what are some other symptoms that we're going to see with that person that might help, speaking to our audience, like might help them be like, kind of have that aha moment of like, oh, this is me, like, and just not realizing it. Cause I think something that I've learned throughout the years is like the body typically whispers before it screams. And sometimes we don't realize like all of our friends are experiencing the same thing. So we chalk it up to normal, or it's common when it's not normal.
Yeah. 100%. And in regards to progesterone, in some cases, yes, that could be the first, but I'd say dependent on total life stress, perceived stress, other stressors outside of training. So not just psychological stress, but let's say you've accumulated over a period of time, you have a number of health issues, right? So progesterone typically will fall either with high perceived stress, high psychological stress, stress of dieting, intense training. There's a number of variables that can impact that hormonal function. I would say in some cases in the red S situation or relative energy deficiency syndrome, sometimes the metabolic adaptation piece of decline in thyroid hormone and the body's perception of low energy availability is contributing and basically signaling, in terms of the brain ovary connection, that's where we're ending up with that lower progesterone. So it is a little bit of a, I'd say we have a little bit of a nuanced conversation there, because for some clients, it could literally just be the training and nutrition if they have relatively low life stress. But I've also seen people with out of range progesterone or suboptimal progesterone, and maybe they're not that crazy with their training, but the high degree of life stress makes the recoverability from training very poor. So in terms of the whispers before the screams, really for both of these individuals, what it's going to come down to is looking at the body's signs and symptoms prior to, because we're not going to go get lab work every single day. Now, we obviously want to monitor our blood chemistry over time, but for many people, where we're going to see this is our energy levels. If we have pronounced fatigue, that's definitely something, poor sleep quality, or difficulty achieving total number of hours of sleep in terms of sleep quantity. Sometimes people have a hard time getting that restful sleep. In many instances, changes in basal body temperature. So if you're someone who's using fertility awareness method or tracking your menstrual cycle using a thermometer, that's something we could look at as well, as we may see basically a decline in that body temperature because of a progression towards like a subclinical hypothyroid state. Right. So that's going to result in lower body temps. We also may see changes in digestion and motility. We could see changes in terms of recoverability from the gym. So maybe before you were doing fine with 5-6 days a week in the gym or 7 days a week in the gym, but in time, maybe those workouts that you were able to recover from before, you're not anymore. So that's definitely something that I would be paying attention to, is kind of across the board, looking at someone's energy levels, looking at sleep and recovery, looking at digestion, and then even looking at stress as well. And as far as the person's speed of kind of the progression or regression in terms of their hormonal state, very much going to be influenced by kind of a combination of those dietary patterns, training, and then overall life stress. So if you put someone in a very traumatic situation, even if training's not that crazy, they still may be more likely to have hormonal symptoms, right? Because that is a significant stressor on hormones, immune system, gut, like really across the board. But there's also younger individuals really don't have a super high amount of stress, maybe not a ton of responsibility, but they're bludgeoning themselves into the ground with training. You don't need high life stress to have physiological dysfunction. It is possible to create it. Now, is it a little bit harder in a way? Yes. Would you also need to be fairly restrictive with your diet? Most likely, but it is possible. So it can kind of manifest in a few different ways. And oftentimes for women, especially in today's society, we see a combination of the two.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why it's so important, is you've taught this so many times, is seasons, right?
Yeah.
Like seasons of training, seasons of nutrition, and why it's so important that honestly, that you look to having a coach by your side, and a coach that you can trust, that understands, like, can pull all of that data from you, right? Like pull all the data from, life stressors to what is your current training load, what is all of those things, to really understand and create a plan of action for you from a training, from a nutrition perspective, as well as like lifestyle practices that are going to best serve you in that current season that you're in. Because exactly like you said, you can have a really young female athlete who has relatively no outside stress and can just destroy themselves in the gym and keep nutrition very low. But you can also have that 35-year-old mom of 3 kids who has a lot of like psychological and physiological stress on their body all the time due to the expectations and what's going on in their life, that they're like, well, this worked for me when I was 25. And it's like, they don't understand that concept, right? Of like, okay, well, that worked for you when you were 25 because you didn't have 3 kids and all of this stuff. We need to tailor that approach, and we need to pull some things back, and you'll get a lot better like results in return from that.
Yeah, definitely seasons and levels of responsibility as well, right? So that 35-year-old versus the 25-year-old, I mean, that level of responsibility may be impacting your sleep quality. It might be impacting your perceived stress during the day. Maybe even, are you maybe reaching for certain foods as a result of stress and pressure and responsibility or coping? So a lot can happen in that decade. And we've now primed the body, whether it's good or bad, with a history of health behaviors related to training and nutrition. So it's not just, oh, I'm 35 with 3 kids. It's you're 35 with 3 kids, and everything you've done over the last 10 years has kind of laid the foundation for how your body's currently responding and how receptive it is to the stimulus of training and nutrition. So I think that's important to note. And it's not just because you have to change your approach, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Doesn't mean we can't achieve results. It's just, we may need to go about it differently and with a different strategy than before to work with your body as it is right now. And that's okay though. So that would be one example. And then in the younger athlete, can also be a situation where, yeah, it's training and calories, but many times the person may be running micronutrient deficiencies, or we see a situation post-birth control, for example, where the use of hormonal contraceptives has impacted the menstrual cycle, and then the training they were maybe able to get away with before with birth control because they didn't notice any changes in their cycle health. Now it's apparent because there's no more birth control kind of overriding that hormonal system or endocrine system and the brain ovary communication. So I think in younger women, it's both the food and the training, but because of the prevalence of birth control, sometimes we don't notice the PMS symptoms, or we don't notice what our cycle health would normally be like, because, if we're taking oral contraceptive, for example, you have that pill bleed. It's very much regulated by the hormones that you're taking from that exogenous substance, taking the synthetic hormones in. So when we shift into that hormone production and we're relying on our body for moving between the follicular phase and luteal phase, now you may notice, okay, actually, when I do overdo my training here, it is really leading to some unfavorable symptoms or fatigue or changes in my biofeedback overall. So I think that's a big piece for younger women versus maybe well, honestly, too. I mean, we see women now who are even approaching perimenopause who have still been on hormonal contraceptives for a long time. So that's not just like your 20-year-olds that are dealing with that, but it can impact your perception around how your training's impacting you, how your nutrition's impacting you, not to mention now trying to get those systems back online can present some challenges as well.
Yeah. And I think there's a big not misconception, like lack of knowledge for a lot of females around what cycle health should look like and what can impact like cycle health, right? Like, I got a text message today from a client who is around the age of potential perimenopause, who went through like a full gut protocol with a practitioner before she met me, came to me, and now we're prepping her for an ultra marathon in 9 months' time. And we've dieted down and we're like 3 pounds away from losing 25 pounds. And it's been stellar, like the whole process. And she texted me today and she was like, hey, I'm noticing some more like crampy feelings around ovulation 2nd month in a row. And I explained to her, I was like, well, you've been in a deficit for a while. We've been very successful. This is probably just a biofeedback marker of like your body's starting to whisper at us and say, hey, we're approaching to the end. And like, I think everybody is different. Because I have another client who, again, perimenopausal age, has successfully lost a good amount of weight. And we were doing really, really fine with all biofeedback, like shining stars and stripes, like everything was good. And all of a sudden, within a matter of 1 week, like just like energy and brain function, like went out the window.
Yeah, can definitely happen.
And there's such a lack of exactly that. Education around that is those are whispers. And that's where like having a good coach to help walk through these things with you and show you these things so you can understand when you go into your next dieting phase, if you're no longer with that coach, is such an important piece of like educating yourself so you can understand what's going on.
100%. Yeah. If you don't understand the biofeedback and the symptoms to look for, and you're basically just looking at, rate of loss and what's going on with the scale, you are going to be in trouble. And even if you're not working with a coach, these are things you should be paying attention to in terms of your own health, because it is an indication of, when we look at menstrual cycle health, that is very much a pulse on women's health. So if you're not tracking your cycle, or you're not paying attention to those symptoms, or you just take it as like, oh, well, my friends also feel this way, and then we all are relying on Advil or Tylenol or whatever to mask the symptoms, like that's a problem. That means we need to be addressing things from a training, nutrition, and lifestyle perspective so those symptoms are not as intense. And I love that you mentioned the cognitive piece as well, because I think so many women are used to functioning in that state of brain fog or low energy, or you and I have been talking a lot about thyroid lately, right? So it's a lot of times the result of the chronic dieting, the result of the poor gut health or the birth control. It's not so much just the cycle symptoms. Yes, there may be some indication in our labs or biofeedback that our reproductive hormones are not optimized. But in addition to that, there's so many women who are struggling with cognition and brain fog and even mood, right? How much mood and mental health can be significantly impacted by hormones. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not paying attention to these initial signs, all of a sudden it seems like this big issue came out of nowhere, when in reality it's been brewing for quite some time.
Yeah, I talk to women all the time. It happens a lot where they're like, they realize like all of a sudden they're just like really short with their kids or really short with their husband, and they don't want to be, and they don't understand why, but it just keeps happening. And unfortunately, when there's a lack of education around it, like it's a lot of just kind of shrug your shoulders and you talk to your girlfriends. And again, it's normal. And you just chalk it up to, well, that's normal, or that's how my mom was, or when it's common, it's not normal. Moving on to GLP-1s, right? So we have the opposite side. Like you said, we're dealing with someone who has pushed the metabolic system the complete opposite way. They're overweight. They're struggling to lose weight. Hunger cues are completely the opposite. And I think, given my recent work history over the last year, like I've gotten a firsthand experience working with them a lot. And it's definitely changed my opinion around them to a degree. And I think that they can be massively beneficial for people, but I think it needs to be understood from the get. And there needs to be a lot of education of like, hey, this is a tool in the toolbox for a season to get you to a place where you can then create those behaviors, hopefully without them.
And it's a powerful tool though. So
Yeah.
the thing is, you're coming in with, we're not trying little baby tools anymore. When you're bringing out GLP-1, that is something that is very, very powerful and can change hunger very quickly. Now that can be good, but now remember, if we ever reach a point where we're removing that tool, now all of a sudden making those healthy meal choices, getting in the right range of calories becomes harder. So we have to develop the skills of appropriate preparation with our nutrition and being able to maybe mentally understand like what's going on with our relationship with food, because your actual physical hunger and cravings will shift significantly. Well, cravings more so the mental side, but your physical hunger cues will change as a result of that GLP-1. We do need to be careful with the dose if overdose can really impact gut health and overall motility. Yeah. But I do agree it can be powerful in certain instances for the right candidate. And now no one really can tell you that without a thorough health history, maybe looking at your labs, understanding, what's going on with your current diet, where you've had your calories in the past, where you struggle with hunger and appetite, and if you're a candidate for that powerful tool, right? And if you potentially are someone who could maybe benefit from something else. There are also individuals who are struggling to lose weight and they have suboptimal hormone function in other areas. Sometimes correcting that can actually allow them to eat more. And then we're able to diet on slightly higher calories. Now we're not needing the GLP-1 as much versus someone who's maybe trying to use the GLP-1 to get their calories very low to get into a deficit, when overall, energy expenditure, maybe we could have adjusted for through, maybe it's your thyroid, maybe it's testosterone, just getting to a place where, okay, I feel like going to the gym now. I feel like going for a walk. So many women, especially during menopause, but even earlier in life, it's that effort doesn't really feel it feels, there's a level of lethargy there. We're kind of dragging ass a little bit. Maybe the performance in the gym. It's not just that you went to the gym. What was the actual output of what happened there? The ability to actually push yourself in a training session. And maybe there's a level of RIR that like you haven't achieved before, or you're not really training that close to failure. Not that we need to do that all the time, but some people just are like 7 reps shy of failure, not actually close to failure. So if we get to a place where thyroid's better, testosterone's better, cycle health, progesterone, all of these things, there is a chance that you are just trying to shrink yourself into these very low calories of like, oh, I need to be at like 900 calories to lose weight. Well, what if we could actually diet on slightly higher calories after a season of not dieting? Right? I don't see GLP-1 as like the go-to solution there. However, for someone who really needs help with that hunger management, if we're also looking for maybe some benefits on the insulin sensitivity side, there are people who are going to be better candidates in that arena. So I agree that there's like a situational use case to be made. I think the problem that I have and where I'm seeing it go in terms of today's society is when it's pushed on kids, right? Or in place of the healthy habits. If you're someone who's tried the healthy habits and you're also, if GLP-1 is going to be the thing that helps you get active and eat a healthy diet and be consistent with it and get you over the hump, more power to you if you're able to sustain that. I think the problem that we're having right now is because of the popularity of the drug, it's receiving so much more attention than even basic nutrition education and exercise. I mean, we're pulling PE and physical, basic physical education and fitness testing and exercise from school curriculums. Kids are more overweight and obese. Nutrition's getting worse. Cafeteria food's not getting better. But then pediatricians are now potentially using GLP-1 with children. So I'm okay to understand that there may be an appropriate Western medication or a pharmaceutical to come in certain instances, but I don't think we can skip over the low-hanging fruit of nutrition and exercise. Like ideally, the best clients are using and practicing both, and then also layering in, okay, this peptide may be helpful for my goals, and I'm also going to use a smaller amount or start, in a place where versus like, I'm going to go to the largest dose right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Also, there's misdosing with these compounds. People struggle to kind of calculate those appropriate doses of the peptide. So I think misdosing is a big issue. And then the pediatric conversation, those are probably things that grind my gears the most, but I don't think it's something where it's like, oh, no one should ever take this.
No.
But there's also seems to be some good evidence emerging on microdosing it.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see where that goes. I don't know that the cat's fully out of the bag yet in terms of having all the information on microdosing, but microdosing GLP-1 could be a nice in-between where we're not abusing a very powerful compound, but maybe we're getting some of those benefits from a hormonal profile and in terms of helping with that appetite regulation and decision-making. And that leads us in the right direction in terms of fat loss, or also improvements in our biomarkers too, because so many individuals have are headed towards metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetic, have skewed lipid profiles, insulin resistant, A1C's off. And so if we're able to manage the calorie side of it, a lot of, we're going to see those lab markers follow suit, especially in someone who's maybe still a little bit overweight or has some body fat to lose.
I think there's two things that I want to talk about off of this. Is like, number one is like, I have a client who successfully lost like 70 pounds on a GLP-1 before coming to me. And then this was an ongoing conversation for a while. Initially gained back 10 pounds, which is, when we're talking about that large of a loss, 10 pounds really, okay, you water, glycogen, some extra fecal matter in your body, like not a huge deal. But then all of a sudden it slipped up to like 18 pounds. And now there's like a cause for concern. And when we finally got to the point of onboarding and an intake, it was very clear that there was a digestive health issue going on that was causing some of the irregularity in like hunger cues and other things like that. And I think that's an important conversation to have, where it's these GLP-1s are becoming too widely used without good oversight, where they aren't doing good intakes. Because I think that for someone who maybe has 30 to 100 pounds to lose, a GLP-1 could be massively beneficial. But if a good quality intake isn't done, and we're not understanding where this person is at, and if they may have some gut health considerations that need to be addressed. So maybe that is the client that like, maybe we do a microdose, but we're also addressing their gut health at the same time. And then slowly but surely, once the gut health is addressed, we increase dosing, we go along, we get the weight loss off, and then they come out the other side in a win-win situation where they can maintain that weight loss, because now it's been first and foremost is addressing the gut health, and we've managed to eat a lot higher nutrition, manage their training better, and they're seeing great results. Like they're just having better mood, better energy. They're not having issues with, being short with their husband or their kid, getting better sleep quality, all of those things. I think that's a huge conversation like that needs to be had around these compounds, because they are so powerful. Like even if you are having gut health issues or maybe hormonal imbalances issues, they're going to put you in a deficit.
Yeah, you will probably still lose weight in spite of those issues. Whereas if you were not on that compound, you might have a significantly harder time losing weight. I don't know about an exact set parameter on the weight range, though I would agree that generally speaking, the more weight you have to lose, or if the degree of weight you have to lose is a huge risk factor for your health and longevity, or you have something that is predisposing you to chronic illness and disease and the deterioration of your health. Like if your metabolic health is already in the gutter and we're looking at potentially an early death, I think that's a situation where something powerful that can help someone get some of that weight off, see some positive feedback, engage in those habits, maybe also due to the weight loss, easier ability to engage in exercise due to less joint pressure and strain, like as a result of being very overweight or obese. So there are certainly benefits and cases that could be made. I think we have to talk about the gut health portion, as you mentioned, and the sequence of these things. So, and you're not going to be able to tell that through a quick, very quick, like 5-minute glance at someone's health. It requires a bit more of a thorough deep dive. So I love that you said, hey, in some situations, we need to look at the gut health first. And other clients, maybe they've taken the GLP-1 first with a provider. And now actually we need to put some TLC over here because we kind of missed this in the sequence. And now we're kind of paying the price. So I love that you mentioned the sequence, the impact of the GLP-1 on other bodily systems, and just the time and attention that's paid in making a decision, because this is something that is powerful. And we can't just, it's not like Monopoly where we just pass go, collect our $200 and like, we're on our way. GLP-1 is something that there are pros, there are cons, and also in many cases, the dose is driving, some of these side effects that we're seeing if someone does overdo it. But what we're seeing too is with that past health history, like for that person who's 30 to 100 pounds overweight, a lot of the past food choices, stress, like the state of the gut microbiome, it's in a more vulnerable place.
Yeah.
It's more susceptible to these infections or dysbiosis, intestinal permeability, immune system dysfunction. So because it's somewhat vulnerable, it's just easier. It becomes the straw that broke the camel's back versus, someone who's maybe has great gut health and it introduces a GLP-1. So I love that you brought in some nuance to the conversation. I don't know that there's an agreed upon sequence yet. I think what I'm most excited to see is some research on lower doses and then having more population data. So it's not only for situations with obesity, right?
Yeah.
For example. So that's going to come in time. And there's so much funding behind these drugs because of the monetary component for pharmaceutical companies that there's certainly going to be more and more research on it. We're even seeing things in terms of brain health. So I think that's powerful as well.
Yeah,
So.
there's been some recent conversations that I've had that about they're studying microdoses for like gambling addictions.
Oh, wow.
Of GLP-1s and the impacts that it can have on neurochemistry. And they're starting to look into that. Yeah. But like the gut health conversation, right, is to give some maybe even more nuance to what Sam said is like, when we look at, okay, how does someone become obese? Typically they're practicing a standard American diet. Their gut health may not be in a great place. It may not be like quote unquote fully gone. And maybe they don't have like SIBO or H. pylori, but maybe they're dealing with some like dysbiosis and some dysfunction in the gut. And if you go too hot and heavy handed with a GLP-1, you can lower your calories to a point where now stomach acid production has gone down and you do invite the possibility of having small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or H. pylori or something like that come in. And now you have just you've given yourself another problem.
Right. Yeah, it's stomach acid and obviously the motility piece is huge. So what those two together are, kind of the devil's in the details here. If we look at it in a multifaceted way, the standard American diet is contributing to systemic inflammation and usually insulin resistance and a hard time regulating our blood sugar. That in itself is inflammatory. With that weight gain and standard American diet, we often see high blood pressure and a number of other health issues. Where people lose sight of gut health in all of this is understanding that we're quite literally feeding our microbiome with all of these foods that we're choosing, the hypercaloric, packaged, multi-ingredient, super tasty snack foods that are not very micronutrient dense impact that gut flora in an entirely different way than when you're choosing lean proteins and fruits and vegetables or single ingredient starchy carbohydrates versus something that's, in the middle of the snack aisle that you can go to town on, have the whole bag and not even feel full. Very, very different conversation. So motility slowed combined with low stomach acid is like the worst possible recipe in terms of those overgrowths that Garrett is speaking to here. And so when we are under eating, that can impact the motility. Also just that underfeeding in general, again, coming back to thyroid function, we have to pay attention to that. And if we haven't actually learned the practices of healthy eating we may have not learned how to appropriately regulate our bowel movements with good nutrition. So now we're adding in the GLP-1, which can impact the bowel movements. But if you don't have those nutritional foundations in place, you might have a hard time getting things back on track, or we're now struggling with constipation. Constipation can lead to a host of problems across the board, not just in the gut, but then in terms of estrogen clearance, other hormonal imbalances. And then we have our thyroid conversion that we have to pay attention to in terms of how gut and liver can play into that as well. So really low stomach acid, motility, all of these are important considerations. GLP-1 mainly impacting that motility piece. But so many individuals in the Western world, due to high stress, caffeine intake, as Garrett mentioned, they are predisposed to lower stomach acid. So really, this is where those two together, powerful combination that leads to a lot of the gut symptoms that people are experiencing.
Yeah. And I think the best part of this conversation is like, neither of us are saying that GLP-1s don't have a place. We're not trying to badmouth it. We're trying to, something I haven't really actually talked about on my podcast at this point is I had gastric bypass like 16 years ago now. And I wish that something like this existed back then as a tool to approach my weight loss and get to where I am today, because I have side effects that I'll deal with for the rest of my life that like I really don't talk about, that no one knows about, that I wouldn't wish on a lot of people. Like I wish that they existed, but it isn't a red pill. It's a tool, a very powerful tool.
And I think the verdict's still out in terms of it's hard to parse through when so much research is being funded by pharmaceutical companies, and pharmaceutical companies stand to gain so much and profit so much. A long duration use case, if we look at this from a business perspective, is increasing lifetime customer value. So these pharmaceutical companies, these drugs are very expensive. They're being taken by individuals. They're being readily prescribed to them. And it's hard to remove that confounding variable of finance from it, which makes the interpretation challenging. That's why I'm also curious about the microdose, because that's a situation where, hey, this person's a customer, but we're not like blowing through this medication, right?
Yeah.
So I think as research emerges there and these different use cases, we can have a more intelligent conversation about it. I've almost gotten to a place where I'm like, hey, I know the effects on the body and our physiology. I don't know that we have a perfect answer in terms of, hey, is this the saving grace, or is this actually something that for many people is doing some harm in terms of gut health and things, right? Yeah. That's where the health history aspect that Garrett mentioned is so important, because if we're using something that has some variability to it, we have to be very clear on you, the individual, because that at least allows us to apply this variable safely and responsibly and monitor for side effects, right? And anytime we have something super powerful like this, we may not necessarily, like it's not going to be without any consequence, right? There's usually, with tremendous upside, there might be a little bit of downside. I think in terms of your story, your history, it's so much of what led you to be the coach that you are today, and also why you can appreciate some of these things, why you have sensitivity to some of these topics. And it also sent you down a health optimization rabbit hole that really has allowed you to provide knowledge and the experience gleaned for your clients. And now there's a story to tell. And also you can understand when someone has challenges with their weight versus the coach who never had to deal with that. I think there's a level of empathy and sensitivity and communication that comes with having been in that position. So GLP-1 or no GLP-1 or bypass or no bypass, I think it's all part of your story. And it's also led to you wanting to seek out additional education and be a resource for people, and maybe even encourage people to really think through these decisions and be responsible and seek out different options, right? And that's why in many cases you have clients where maybe they're not utilizing that GLP-1 with their provider. Maybe they're seeking other forms of optimization. And maybe it was actually they needed to optimize thyroid, or they needed to replete low testosterone. And that was impacting their mood and their mental health, because we know low testosterone can predispose us to depression, anxiety, and so many other unfavorable mental health and mood related symptoms, and being in a lower emotional state. So I like that as someone who's gone through something that was quite serious and severe, there's a little bit of like TLC with these topics versus people who are a little more reckless in their presentation of it online. And I think that's needed, right? And especially when there's this financial conversation, there's so much marketing too being thrown at clients. So many people want to take GLP-1s,
Right.
but realizing, hey, this isn't like a perfect shortcut. You know, we're still going to have to pave the path of the shortcut versus the other ways that there are. So I think this is something where I think we'll look back 3 to 5 years and have more information to have this conversation. But for now, I think at least being clear on your health history, and your lab markers allows you to determine, is this the system that really needs the most support? Or does the gut need supporting? Does the thyroid need supporting? Does testosterone or progesterone, et cetera, or in a menopausal female, like comprehensive bioidentical HRT, is that what needs to be supported? And then once you're sleep, like let's follow that train of thought. Maybe for the individual who's not sleeping well and struggling with their weight loss, they have the 15, 20 pounds to lose, but through optimizing their sleep, well, sleep plays a massive role in blood sugar regulation and hunger. How many people have woken up as a hungry hippo? Like if you're listening to the show and you're like, hey, I didn't sleep that well, I really want those snacks. Or you snapped at your husband, or you snapped at your kids. Sleep being a big part of this, what we fail to realize in many cases with hormonal optimization, especially in women, is the role of these hormones in supporting restful sleep, and then how that impacts mood and appetite and the cascade. So if we can get these lifestyle aspects moving in the right direction, you may find that your weight loss plateaus or stagnation points that you are facing, that we can break through those. And maybe we save that powerful tool for a later date. Or we realize, oh, I just was super into that because I saw it in the magazine, not because I actually truly needed that. I actually needed something else for my body. That doesn't mean that someone else's body may not benefit from it. Right. It just means for you, maybe you benefit here. Or for the person who's maybe an individual or female with Hashimoto's, right? And she needs to address thyroid and gut health. That can lead to tremendous results in terms of physique change, body composition, energy levels. So maybe in that case, did we need the GLP-1, right? Or was the GLP-1 just attractive because other people were doing it? We're seeing the marketing behind it versus an individual who's maybe more of that classic case presentation that we talked about. That's not to say that those other two categories can't ever benefit. It just means maybe there's something we can try first. And then a lower risk application as well. And then through that low risk, it buys us time to kind of figure it out without getting to a place where maybe there's a point of no return.
Yeah, because the person that you just talked to, the first person, the sleep, if you're still not having the sleep and you use a GLP-1 to just basically sledgehammer your way through weight loss because it shuts down those negative cascades of the hunger hormones and, you waking up and wanting the snack. Okay, that's great. You lost the weight, but you haven't solved the other problem. And what other negative cascades might we have caused by just sledgehammering our way through weight loss when our body was telling us no, 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 no?
And now try to sustain that versus the person who didn't use it as a sledgehammer, but now has an easier time sustaining that loss versus, oh, I rebounded and regained. If let's say you lose 50 pounds, but you regain 30, well, that's no longer 50 pounds of weight loss. We really lost 20, but now we have the consequence of the caloric restriction that it took to get the 50 off, plus the health consequences of the 30 we regained. Yeah. So now there's multiple sides to this coin. And I totally agree. If we don't have those lifestyle factors optimized, that is going to be a problem. So again, that's where being able to walk through that with someone and be like, hey, I think this actually might be impacting your hunger and cravings because we haven't gotten more than 6 hours sleep in several weeks, right? Let's see how optimizing that helps with maybe making better food choices, or all of a sudden now their fasted blood glucose is in an entirely different place just because we've now optimized for sleep. So agree with that for sure. And just understanding if we take the sledgehammer approach, we are going to have to pay the price potentially down the road, or we're going to have to get a lot of things in order very quickly in order to sustain the weight loss. Yep. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging to keep it off without the medication.
That's where I think it's just like to wrap this all up is if you're going to use a GLP-1, it's so important. Do you have support? Like, do you have support and do you have a plan? Like a plan to go in, a plan to come out? And are you addressing the lifestyle, the nutritional factors? Like, do you actually have support along the way? Because it isn't a red pill. It's not going to magically solve everything. You have to address some things along the way. Now, the real important topic today, best dog breed.
Best dog breed. Well, you picked my question. So Garrett posted a question before this, and I was like, what would be fun to talk about? So for those of you who don't know, if you're following along, so I have 3 fur babies at home. One is a rescue who's like 2% pug and 10% shepherd and part golden retriever, even though he's black and white. I'm like, how did that happen? So it's like part retriever, part shepherd. I literally has part pug, which now I'm like, that makes sense why you grade, like he grayed and got like the white face very early. And pugs typically have that. Yep. So I was like, maybe this DNA thing is actually like kind of accurate. So he's just rescue, he'll be 14 in November. So I've had him for about 13 years. So love rescues. Like he's the first one. And then through my active lifestyle and going to the gym, a couple years ago, ended up getting my first Corso, or Italian Mastiff, if you're less familiar with the breed. And they're very interesting because they seem like these very intense dogs, but they're actually very silly and derpy and goofy and have these very unique personalities that I've come to appreciate. It's interesting too how all of that goofiness and derpiness is kind of woven through really multiple family lines. It's not just like only my dog, because now that I've seen it, some of the mannerisms in the dogs are similar. So I just have an appreciation for that, similar to how some people really like the personalities of certain small dog breeds. So I now have 2 of those, because recently I have a new addition. So now I have a boy who's right around that 5-month mark, probably by the time this comes out. And also have my girl. So she'll be 3 in January. She's about 2. Yeah. But I got her a little bit late though, because she was probably at least, I mean, even by the time you kind of saw her emerge, just because of that process, because she was originally supposed to go to a family in Wisconsin, and then that kind of fell through. And I ended up that was the whole gym ice cube thing. So for those of you who don't know the story, I like ice in some of my workout beverages. Happened to know the owner of the gym that I was going to. He would let me use the ice maker from time to time. So I would go back and grab some ice cubes. Well, when there's a cute puppy around, I'm going to want to play with the puppy, give the puppy some ice cubes, started training the puppy with ice cubes. Well, the manager of that gym, who happened to be in custody of this puppy at that given time, was like, why don't you do a trial run with a cute puppy? How do you think that's going to end? Right. So she's like, just keep her for 24 hours. Just try it out. So the ice cubes in the gym soon became ice cubes at home. And so now she's still here almost 3 years later. So that's kind of her backstory. And then the little fella, who's not so little, he's almost like half the length of our mutual friend. I'll actually send you some photos later. Kind of colleague of Garrett's, I guess you could say, and also friend of mine and someone who helps to occasionally watch my dogs. Now have a photo where it kind of looks like he caught a fish, but he's holding a puppy, and the puppy is almost as long as him, or half as long as him, and he's about 6 feet tall. And this is a puppy that's Sawyer, yeah. So, and this puppy's about 5, right around that 5-month mark, born in April. He's going to be really big. Yeah. So I think Tilly's going to have her work cut out for her when it comes to playtime. So I am partial to that breed now. I think they're also if you socialize early, they are trainable dogs, good for obedience and stuff. They're great family dogs. They're very loyal to family. They do pack up. I would just recommend definitely work with someone who knows what they're doing, get a trainer, don't just go grab one. And then if you do have one that's younger, you need to get around some people very quickly and other dogs and kids. So we're kind of in that process right now with the baby. And so that's kind of cool. So I do love that breed, but also I just love dogs in general. It's just been convenient, and these 2, because of the way they play, you kind of need to have 2 because of how they play with each other, versus if you were to get some sort of small dog or a larger breed dog that doesn't play the same, But what I love about the larger breeds is when they have the puppy face and the big feet, and they just are so goofy with their body, they can't control their mannerisms. So that's always fun, because you're basically just looking at like a baby dinosaur that's just like flopping around, and it's just the cutest thing. And you can't even, it's hard to document with photo or video. Like if you see it in person, you cannot help but laugh. It is like having a built-in comedy show. Anytime you're stressed about anything or with work, like you just literally look over and there's this like goofy dog with paws too big for its body and hasn't grown into its limbs, and the face is all puppy, the mannerisms are all puppy, the personality is puppy, and also the fact that he also sits on my feet while I brush my teeth. So there's just like some cute tender moments with that I'm gonna miss, like as he's gonna be a huge boy. So I won't be able to, I was talking about this with another friend who's in kind of the strength training industry. I was like, I just need to start goblet squatting him every day and kind of follow the progressive overload, like basically like that ancient story of progressive overload that's talking, it was the cows, right? Or the bull, Milo's bull, right? It's like kind of the initial concept with strength training. So I'm like, maybe if I just squat him from like 40 pounds all the way to over 100 pounds, I'll be like, continue to keep good shape, and I'll be able to like front rack.
To put this into perspective, like these dogs can, I mean, he could easily get to be like what, 180?
I don't think he'll be 180. He's not as thick as some of those dogs. When I initially got him, he kind of looked like a baby Great Dane because he's tall and lean. He's leaner than, so my other dog is named Tilly, or Matilda Miller for short, or for long, and Tilly for short. So Tilly's right around 100 pounds, but she was the runt of her litter. He's taller than her, not quite as thick boy, but he's still going to have some muscle on him. So he'll break the 100 mark, but I don't know that he'll be 180, but he will be a big dog and tall, and like he'll have some height to him. Baby horse running around right now.
And I think, you know, it's funny is like talking about like health, fitness. You've done some content relating to the importance of like having animals in your life and how much that can impact like overall like health and well-being. And, you know, we had a couple of discussions about this 8 months ago when I was in the market for a dog, and was like considering a cane corso. And I think there's like seasons of life, and you made a really great point, is it probably just wasn't the best season of life for it. Cause like you said, you have to socialize, like you should be training. It's like a big investment to start out.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. I mean, it's like my primary hobby right now, and I don't really have a lot of time for hobbies. So you can imagine how that's going. But when Garrett and I had the conversation, so there's so many aspects with pets and physical and mental health. A lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm walking the dog, so it's good for my physical health, but it's also the mood benefits, company, you know, overall that companionship, combating loneliness. Loneliness has been demonstrated in research to be nearly like smoking, essentially, in terms of overall health implications. So even having animals, this is why I'm so glad that some of my elderly relatives have cats or pets of some kind for that company at home, especially if they don't have a lot of relatives surrounding them. So I think that's big. So there's the mental health component, and then obviously just getting outside to let your dogs out. Like you're getting sunshine, you're getting in the environment. We're not under fluorescent lighting when you take your dogs out to go to the bathroom, right? So I think that's big. And then if you do get the non-exercise physical activity component, going on some, that's an added perk, right? But it's not just the calories in, calories out. It's the mood, it's the environment, it's getting outside in nature. It's also the companionship. So all of those are really, really big. In terms of the conversation with Garrett and that overall process of who was going to get adopted and what type of dog breed, it really was a season of life consideration, and also just your workload and potentially moving. But I do see, you know, maybe down the road, like with kids or a family, I think they could be a great, great addition. And you were also, that was a time where you're considering more travel and things too. So a smaller dog would be a little more fun size for those adventures and being able to go on the plane potentially, right?
Which for those of you on maybe the podcast that aren't aware of this, is I was fortunate enough to purchase Nyx, my beautiful French bulldog. She is a goofball, and she's 10 months in like a couple of weeks. And she's a whopping 14 pounds.
Oh, 14 pounds. Well, I was gonna give her like somewhere between 15 and 20, but 14. Yeah. At least it's more than 10 pounds in 10 months. So
yeah. So she's 14 pounds, which if you know the breed is actually pretty petite for a French bulldog, but we like her. She's a goofball, and she's just
She's
funny
taken
to
up
be
permanent residency.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And she's also a ice hippo as well. She
A
loves her
mini,
ice cube.
she's a miniature ice hippo for sure. If you guys haven't seen, there's like an Instagram meme. It's like a reel, but in the format of a meme in terms of the style. And it's basically like a hippo running towards the refrigerator when you hear the ice machine turn on. And so we joke around about our ice hippos, though they have a roughly 90-pound difference between them, or 85. Tilly's leaned out a little bit. As we're getting into cooler weather, she can be more active, play outside a little bit more. We're adjusting the food intake without GLP-1s, and we've managed to sustain pretty good body composition. So still, how many nicks does it take to get to a Tilly? Like 6.
Yeah.
You need 6 nicks to, and that's the runt of the litter too.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I like Frenchies. I've considered getting my mom a Frenchie, but there's, I still think with that and dog ownership, there's still a level of responsibility and take care of it and training and all that. And I was like, my mom's not going to do that at this stage of her life. So she's got 2 cats, but I do like Frenchies. The face, that, and I actually met a miniature, like little English bulldog recently, which kind of has like the cuteness factor of the Frenchie, but also the roly-poliness of a bulldog, and it's kind of a funny combination.
It is. Yeah. You actually brought this up in a recent just like review of my business, and I really like this question to wrap up the podcast is, what are you doing to be intentional in like this season of your life?
Is this going to be a regular podcast question? I hope it becomes a regular podcast question. So what am I doing to be intentional? So bridging from the dog conversation, one is just like that socialization and training, because I know that it's like your health and fitness. An investment of time now has a time payoff later. Yep. It's true of fitness. It's true of business. It's true of life and family. Sometimes we're diverting attention and time to a particular arena, but the goal is that there's an ROI of that down the road. So I'm definitely in a season where I'm being intentional about that in terms of socialization, in terms of business, definitely a level of intentionality around team, and also focusing on honing in on things that work specifically for us and using data that supports that to then go in and refine things with kind of a fine-tooth comb, and being specific in who we're talking to. So from a business perspective, there's some intentional aspects of marketing that people will see kind of emerge over a period of time. Intentional there. And then family. So for me right now, having 2 parents who are kind of struggling with their health respectively, different ways. So one you would never really know. And then for the other, like a little bit more noticeable in some ways. And so it's being intentional about doing some bucket list items and, spending time in that way. And so while there's not necessarily a definite timeline, so I'm being hyper intentional with the exact chronology of things, it's still just carving out time for that and being able to make it happen even in a busy season. So those are my 3. I'd say mix of family, just the training, and then also with business as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.